Good evening and welcome to Tanu's podcast, and we're being hosted by Paraiso Gardens located in Makueni Wote. And we're going to explore the intersection of gender, governance and development. Land remains one of the most powerful economic assets in Kenya, yet for many women, ownership, control and succession rights remain contested terrain, often shaped by culture, law and resource allocation. Today, we unpack gender development, gender-responsive budgeting, and women's empowerment in land ownership and succession. Joining me are two experts who will be sitting in through this conversation, and on my left is Ms. Jennifer Chumwa, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and Makueni County Solicitor. She will be guiding us through legal and succession frameworks affecting women's land rights. Also on set is Mr. Boniface Mutua, the Chief Officer in charge of budgeting and a specialist on statistics. He will be helping us understand how public financing can either entrench inequality or dismantle it. Welcome to the show. So welcome to the show, and maybe we can begin. When we talk about gender development in the county context, what does it practically mean, and why is it that whenever we talk about gender, many people start thinking about women? Maybe you can go first.
Thank you for having me in this show. When we talk about gender, it's not specific about women or men, but it's all encompassing of how both women and men, they hold power, or they participate in resource allocation, all participate in decision making, which are geared towards development. And if this is inclusive, if the whole process of power sharing, resource allocation, decision making is gender inclusive, development at the end of it all will ensure that it is gender sensitive and enhances gender equality.
Mm-hmm. So maybe CEO Mutua, what is it, with people when we talk about gender, they think of women?
Yes, thank you for having us. First of all, to begin is the conversation about gender. From where it started at the point of addressing the inequalities that existed between men and women. And initially, women were actually disadvantaged. And therefore, every conversation, it became very easy to actually begin thinking that we're only addressing women issues. But ideally, gender is both male and female because these are socially assigned roles. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the conversation about gender equality, gender equity is both men and women. Mm-hmm. But what has contributed to this is the inequality and the disparities that have existed, and especially in the three fronts, whether in the economic sphere, in the social cultural perspective, and also in the legal and the policy framework that still exists. So there has been that bias that every time one mentions gender, the biasness is on women. But what has brought this is women have been disadvantaged for a lot of time based on several factors.
Okay, so back to you again. So gender is a social difference and power relations distinct from biological sex. How does this conceptual understanding practically inform your respective roles in the county's development agenda?
Thank you. For us to understand how development happens, mm-hmm. Development does not happen in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. It happens in a context of people. And people are shaped by cultural background mm-hmm. and cultural perspectives. And within these cultural perspectives, for example, if we take the context of our county, this is the Kamba culture. There are the socially constructed beliefs and roles that have been defined by the culture with respect to women and men. And these become very powerful in shaping the perception, in shaping how development happens. Because ideally, the drivers of development people who are driving development, they are first constructed by the society. I am a man brought up in a cultural setup. Irrespective of whether I have an advanced degree in economics, in development, the cultural training, the cultural background, whatever I've been able to learn over time, still shapes how I execute the policies. And therefore, culture and these beliefs that are shaped by the society have a big role in shaping development. And now where now the rubber meets the road is in identifying what are the barriers that actually get to inhibit women and men to effectively participate in economic activities and in development. And therefore, this discussion about gender has got nothing to do with whether you are biologically born a man or a woman, because this whether you are a man or a woman does not really have any factor with development. But we've seen how the socially assigned roles, really impact and affect development. Therefore, the conversation must narrow down to how does development impact on women? How does development impact on men? With respect to the socially assigned roles. For example, everyone believes that women are majorly supposed to play reproductive roles at home. And so as we design development, and if this development is designed with that lens and perspective, there will be no difference. The inequalities will still continue to be, the gap will still continue to widen. And of interest is actually the recent findings by Kenya National Bureau of Statistics in their recent publication on unpaid domestic work and care work. The findings is that 23% of our GDP, all the production of the nation, is accounted for by unpaid domestic work and care work.
Yeah.
So it means that the amount of hours, because annually is 25 billion hours that is put by women in unpaid domestic and care work.
Yeah.
And this is, the disparity is so huge. For example, when women are taking care of children, they are spending 3 billion hours in taking care of children and home care. When you compare that to men, men are actually spending 300 million hours, and that disparity is so huge. And therefore, the conversation about development is to ensure how do we bridge that gap? That a lot of effort that goes through the unpaid domestic work, how do we quantify it and how do we ensure that that is well taken care of in the discussion about development?
Okay, so Jennifer, poverty limits access to opportunities and disproportionately to women. So how does the county government of Makueni address these issues?
Thank you. I want to take us back to the question from Sia Mutua. If you look at the whole construction of development and its relationship with gender and aspects of equality, it trickles down to what the society has always been constructed to believe. For the longest time, we have been living in a patriarchal society whereby men are the ones who are taking part, who were taking active roles in decision making. The role of a woman, even in this social construction of governance, for example, in the Kamba culture, we used to have them by. Women could not actively participate in those decision making, but they will be deep in the background. They are doing the roles of ensuring the men, as they make the decisions, their stomachs are well taken care of. There is water, there is huji, there is everything else. So the men will end up making decisions which maybe they don't have agenda lenses in incorporating the woman. And that has gone over to whereby even after getting the Constitution, 2010 Constitution, which caters for everyone and recognizes equality, whereby every person has a right to participate in decisions. Generally, every person has equal rights. This one is still, the implementation of it is still facing a lot of obstacles because there is that social construction, there is that cultural inhabitants. So that one has carried over. And if you look at the poverty index, because of that continued patriarchal system, you find women still, even if now they are emancipated, they are empowered to an extent, such that they know that I can own property. Now they have right to go work, earn money. You still find that the same women, whatever they are earning, they are able to own their own properties, but they cannot, because society deep down, their minds have already been constructed such that it's only the men who can own property. So they end up giving their power to own property, all to have money in their bank accounts, all to invest. They give the power to their male friends. For example, if it's a woman who is married, you find that all the properties they have contributed jointly, they are giving it the property to be registered in the name of the husband. If you have a boyfriend, as a woman, you feel like it is a taboo for you to have money. And that itself, it has led a society whereby the woman will always say that I don't have anything. For me to be able to buy item 1, item 2, I have to ask for the man. So that poverty has continued for a while, and the opportunities which are there, the over time, since that construction of the gender role and the old structure of the old structure of the old governance issues, you find that it has made women all poverty level to increase. And this itself at the county level is being addressed at the point of, first of all, sensitization. You find that we are sensitizing the women and letting them to understand, both women and men, letting them to understand if it is ownership of property. The Constitution and Article 40 gives every person a right to own property, acquire and inherit property. And therefore with that, you find that someone will be able to put their foot forward, and they follow up with everything, with whatever they have, to ensure that they own it legally. Also, as a county, we have a program. You realize that majority of the properties in many rural setups, they are inherited properties. And as I have said, the patriarchal system, many cultures did not recognize that women could inherit property, and that has left many divorced women, widows, and daughters of a family have been left out in inheritance. So with that, we are also going, as a county, we are going to an extent of, after sensitizing them on the law, we are helping families to follow up with the succession processes and ensure that every person, whether you are a man, you are a son of that family, you are a daughter of that family, you inherit whatever property your parents left behind in equal measure. And if there are any conflict, we also help to mediate amongst the family through the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. And if the families cannot mediate, cannot commit to the mediation process, we help the families in the court processes, the vulnerable families, that is.
So now on property issue, Wakili, maybe you can talk about land ownership, how it links directly to women, to women's economic empowerment and household resilience.
Thank you. As you have said in the introduction, property is like a backbone of every investment and development. So, if women are allowed to own property, or if women own properties, they first of all have their own financial capability of being able to use the property and access loans. They use the property to secure loans in the banks, and with that they are able to develop themselves economically and also be able to support themselves. Also, with them being able to own property, it's also a step forward towards alleviation of conflicts, because if a woman is not able to own property, they remain every time at the mercies of the men around them, whether it is their spouse or it is their brothers. And therefore, anytime they are not in good terms, chances of them being evicted, they are very high. So there is that aspect of social security, which now trickles down to them having the right mental state and being able to make permanent decisions on how to develop their properties. Yes.
All right. So, Sio Mutua, on gender responsive budgeting. Sounds technical, right? But what is it? How does it matter, matters land and women empowerment issues?
Thank you. When people talk about gender responsive budgeting, gender responsive planning, most of the expectation is that we need to have budgets that are specifically for women. We have activities that really target women, and we have a certain budget line that addresses women. But far from that, the concept of gender responsive budgeting is appreciating that we are able to deal with strategic gender needs. And this gender in this case is not women. Remember, now we are not saying women responsive budgeting. We are saying gender responsive budgeting. And this begins with the conceptualization from the very initial in determining the needs and seeing these needs, how do they affect both gender, both male and female. For example, let's pick a practical example. You say we are doing, the communities are gathered, they are prioritizing water project. We need to realize in that community, how many households are female-headed households? How far do they travel to fetch water?
Good.
And who bears the biggest burden in that particular society? So that in the prioritization, it's not just enough to really have a borehole, drilled and distributed in a certain community, but then it goes deeper to really understand what are the strategic needs of each of these gender in that particular context, and even understanding what are the economic activities and who is participating in what. Now, once we understand who is participating in what, then we go further and ask ourselves, how does this impact or affect this gender? And this begins from the conceptualization of the budget, right from when you are even giving the budget priorities. And I'll give a very simple example. When you're doing public participation for budget and you announce and you give the public notice and you say, on this and this date we'll be having public participation for budget. You realize the timing, when do you really set that public participation forum? It's very important because based on the different gender roles, women are the ones who are bearing the huge burden of the household. Chores that really get to happen there. So they they're waking up, they're taking their kids to school, they are going to the rivers to draw water. So therefore, basically, having that forum anytime before 10, for example, a lot of women will miss out.
Yeah, sure.
Having that forum in the evening, a lot of women will miss out. So even a very simple thing like the timing and the location, the venue for the public participation, you may actually say, of course, it is open to everyone, but then you realize, you are gender blind in terms of how you are designing it. Because having the poster out there, the advert, is not enough. There are a lot of considerations that you have to make to ensure that there is not only tokenism in terms of participation, but meaningful participation. Like women are not just coming and rushing because they have to go back and take care of the household. Because now this is what the society is. So when we appreciate that from the planning, from the design level, then come to the identification of the projects and say, this project, a value chain in agriculture, who participates in this value chain and how do they participate? Even understanding, other dynamics in terms of access and control of resources. Like what Wakili has said, who owns the land? Do they have land ownership? Do they control the farming? Do they control the sales? So that in the design of this value chain development program, you have to take that into consideration. You have to really understand the context and remove those barriers. So the idea about gender responsive budgeting is focusing on the strategic needs of either of the gender, and more importantly, remove those barriers so that then we can be able to empower them to effectively participate. And ultimately, you will have to measure this and see, we've done this intervention, but how beneficial has it been to the community? How beneficial has it been to the society? And we know we've seen even interventions where from a development practitioner perspective, you think that this is the right initiative to work in this community without really considering. Examples have even been given in areas where, from a top-down approach, you get to a community and you realize they are traveling 5 kilometers to fetch water. And you say, no, why can't we do a borehole in this locality? Without even realizing that in some of the communities, the women will actually, that's their social time, that they will actually, socialize, get to know what is happening. That travel. So if you don't factor that in the design of the program, of course the borehole will be there, it will not be utilized. They will actually still continue because there is value that they still draw from that social activity that happens. So the gender responsive budgeting is appreciating the various gender needs and also understanding the disparities, the power imbalances, and the inequalities between both male and female. So in every intervention, you must ask, how does this affect men? How does this affect women? That has to be the discussion.
Quite insightful there. So how do you measure the impact of the interventions? Like, what demonstrates the return on investment for the interventions towards women empowerment?
Yes, in 3 ways. One, you will want to look at different social outcomes or outcomes in terms of development. One, education indicators, such as literacy. If you look at the statistics, you realize there are more men who are literate than women, especially in the older generation. So any investment that is targeted towards education, you will want now to measure that in terms of how many girls are completing their schools, either from grade 6, grade 9, all the way to high school. No, what is the proportion of girls that are actually completing school? In terms of, in the long term, you will measure the literacy rate. You also measure in terms of how many women are participating in economic activities.
Good.
If you are doing an intervention that is targeting women entrepreneurs, you want to see how many businesses are owned and operated by women. Not just on paper, but actually women are actually in charge and in control of the profits. Because you can be a woman, you own the business, but you're not in control of the resources.
That's true.
So again, if you can have the access, but if you don't have control of those resources, then again, you've not achieved much. And the last one is, in the other outcome area is on healthcare. We want to see that women, they have a right to their own healthcare, not only right, but even a say. For example, if we talk about the uptake of family planning, the contraceptives, who has a say in terms of, in terms of the choice for the contraceptives,
Exactly.
in terms of choice, in terms of having children, because all these services are available, but having access and having a say and having a control and a say over it, that is also a big measure and indicator. Then you'll also be able to see much of the other outcomes in terms of the health outcomes. Look at the maternal mortality rate, maternal mortality ratio, in terms of the health of the children. Because literally, if a child is malnourished, you realize that they have not had access to the right food,